So we're going to put up the tweet that you sent out after the Mexico part of this deal was done. As we remember, they first came to terms with Mexico, and you said the Club for Growth stands by Donald Trump. I won't use his Twitter handle. 0%, 0%. That's tariffs, free trade goal. Proposed Mexico NAFTA 2.0 deal sadly raises barriers, particularly rules of origin, wage requirements, et cetera. Okay, we've got the deal now with Canada. How do you feel about that? Because some of those things are still in there. We still have rules of origin. We still have wage requirements.
No, that's right. Let's see. Overall, I think this is a good deal. One, it creates certainty. We've seen a seamless transfer from NAFTA to USMCA, and that certainty will help the economy tremendously. But you're right. There's still the content requirements and the wage controls that arbitrarily increase labor costs. Both of those work against North American auto manufacturing. They make cars more expensive that are made here in America. And that will put us at a disadvantage around the world and put us at a disadvantage for American consumers. So there's more to be done. The other thing, David, that I really want to focus on is now the president needs to get rid of the aluminum and the steel tariffs because, frankly, they actually now fight against the benefit of this USMCA. Specifically, if we're trying to create more content in the United States, you don't want to have arbitrarily higher inputs, aluminum and steel, into the car. So that one works for more U.S. jobs, the other works against it. Now what he needs to do is get rid of the steel and aluminum tariffs so that they all work to help our economy.
So why didn't he? You're down there in Washington. Explain this to me, because when this came out, I was surprised they didn't all wrap that together and get rid of those tariffs. Why are they still there?
I think you've got a couple people that are close to him on this, Navarro and Lighthizer, who believe in a fortress America. Higher tariffs is better in their view. And so once they put a new tariff in place, it's not just negotiations for them. They want to keep it. I do believe the president when he says, I'm using this as negotiation. We'll try to get to 0 tariffs, but we got to negotiate by being strong. But then in his other ear, he's got these protectionists advising him, keep the tariffs. So hopefully now he'll be able to step back and look and say, oh, now maybe this time we got to get rid of these two for at least Canada and Mexico because they're undermining the good things I did in my new USMCA agreement.
Which takes us to China, necessarily, where you have more and more tariffs, you have less and less certainty, the two things that you're really concerned about. And also, we have both the president and we just talked to Wilbur Ross saying we're in no big rush with China. We think it's going to take some time. We don't think they're ready to come to the bargaining table. What's your position on that?
We think it's important that they do get to a negotiated agreement and restore free trade between the two countries. Yes, there are many things that we need to push China on, particularly the intellectual property and the theft that occurs of that. But sitting back and saying we're going to let China stew, it hurts America too. When we put those tariffs on, every day that means Americans are paying higher costs for the goods that come from China.
So you run an organization called Club for Growth, and you've been pro-tax cuts as a way to get growth in this country. You got a big round of tax cuts. They're talking about a 2.0. At the same time, poll after poll comes out and says the American people are not all that wild about this. It's not all that popular, and if anything, it's coming down in popularity. Why is that?
Well, first, let's point out that this would be great for the economy. It would continue the boost that we see from the first tax cuts, and it would be fair to the middle class by making their tax cuts permanent. We actually did a poll that was more targeted. We looked at the swing districts in Congress, and we found that in those districts, unlike maybe a broad general poll, tax cuts were a positive issue for Republicans. The Republican voters wanted to see it. They were more interested in helping them out, whereas before they were kind of, I don't really care about this election. And then the independent voters, that was the number one issue that we saw they cared about that Congress could do for them.
Yeah, I want to make a correction, actually. I misspoke. In fact, what it shows is the disapproval is starting to come down a little bit. It's still more disapproving than approving, so I want to make sure we're accurate on that. More
that
people
makes
disapproving,
sense to me, David.
But it's starting to come down some, actually, so I don't want to mislead you on that. One of the things about growth is how much debt we're taking on, because sooner or later, with all the debt we're taking on, that is going to impede growth. How do you play out that balance? Aren't you concerned about the borrowing by the U.S. government?
Yeah. Well, tax policy leads to economic growth. That helps, in the end, reduce those deficits because you've got more revenue coming into the government. the way to tackle the spending, and it is a real problem, a serious one that frankly this administration and this Congress have not addressed. They've failed to address. But the way to do that is on the spending side. Tackle the entitlements, make them modern and therefore less expensive, and tackle the runaway spending. We have an ad up on one of the Democrat senators, Tester from Montana, where he complains that Congress spends like drunken sailors. This was when he was first running. And then we point out, boy, it's gotten worse ever since he's been there. And that's true, sadly, on both sides of the aisle.
Well, exactly. We've been talking about this for a good long time. My late dear friend Pete Peterson wrote book after book on this very subject. And as you say, it's gotten worse, it hasn't gotten better. Is there anybody in a leadership position who's really addressing this in Washington today?
Right now, everybody takes a pass. There's a lot of political incentives to do the discretionary spending, right? The lobbyists and pay PAC checks to congressmen who help them get their spending on both sides of the aisle. And the entitlements politicians are afraid of. They view it as a third rail. If we go there and try to fix it, the opponents will distort what we're doing, and that will end up hurting us in the next election. That takes presidential leadership, by the way, and President Trump, when he got elected, took that off the table. I'm hoping if he decides to run for re-election, he'll put it on there and say, I'm the only guy who can solve this.
And finally, David, I want to talk about Judge Kavanaugh for a minute. I know you know him. I'm not going to ask you whether you'd vote for him or not, what the Senate will do. But I do want to talk about your issues and what the difference would make of whether Brett Kavanaugh sits in the Supreme Court or not for your issues.
I do know him, and he's a man of great character. On our issues, on what the court would decide on economic matters, he has a strong record of really saying to the regulatory state, there's not enough accountability here. Congress needs to take more accountability for these rules. We don't want to have all of our policy decisions being made by unaccountable, unelected bureaucracies. He's very strong on that, and that'll be a good vote on the Supreme Court for those issues. He's also very strong on property rights, protecting property rights, and I think, therefore, would be a great justice.